The ring flashed on the tray, and the waitress stopped breathing. Claire Bennett had balanced 6 plates, a sweating pitcher of sweet tea, and the sharp moods of rich men before midnight. But nothing in her 24 years had prepared her for the gold band on the stranger's hand. It caught the amber light above booth 12 as he reached for his glass. Heavy, old-fashioned, engraved with a tiny crest worn smooth by time. Her fingers tightened around the tray so hard the metal bit into her palm. She knew that ring. Not the exact scratches, not the size, but the design. Her mother wore one almost every day, even while washing dishes, even while sleeping through pain she never explained. The man wearing it did not look like someone who shared anything with a tired woman in a roadside diner. He sat in a black wool coat that cost more than Claire's monthly rent, shoulders still, posture exact, with 2 men at separate tables pretending not to watch the room. He had the kind of face that made other people lower their voices without understanding why. Cold eyes, clean hands, a scar near his jaw like a sentence half erased. He was not local. Men like him never were. "Coffee refill, sir?" Claire asked, but her voice came out thinner than she wanted. He looked up once. That was all. Yet in that brief glance, she felt the force of a man accustomed to obedience, danger, and silence. Ethan Vale did not speak immediately. He studied her name tag, her shaking hand, the tray she held too carefully. Then he gave the smallest nod. Claire poured, but her attention stayed on the ring. Her mother had once turned hers inward whenever anyone knocked at the apartment door. As a child, Claire thought it was superstition. As an adult, she knew fear when she saw it. Elena Bennett feared that ring. A burst of laughter came from the counter where 2 off-duty deputies were finishing pie. The dishwasher slammed a rack in the kitchen. The neon open sign hummed in the front window. Everything ordinary kept moving, and yet booth 12 had become the center of a storm only Claire could feel. She should have walked away. Instead, she set the pot down and heard herself say, "Sir, my mother has a ring like yours." The sentence landed harder than a gunshot. Ethan's fingers froze around the coffee cup. Not tightened, not flinched. Froze. The dark liquid trembled once against the porcelain lip and then stilled. His eyes lifted to her face with a speed that stripped the room of noise. One of the men at the far table half rose from his seat, already reading danger where no one else could see it. "What did you say?" Ethan asked. The words were quiet, but quiet in a way that made quiet feel expensive. Claire swallowed. She could feel every eye in the diner beginning to tilt toward them, not from curiosity yet, but from instinct. Trouble had a pressure to it. "My mother," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "She has a ring with the same engraving." He stood, not abruptly, deliberately. The booth slid back with a low scrape over tile. At 6'3", he seemed to redraw the dimensions of the room just by rising. The deputies at the counter turned. The cook leaned through the kitchen pass. Even the waitress at register 3 stopped counting change. Claire's manager, Ron Mercer, crossed the floor at once, smelling of fryer grease and panic. He was a small man with a red face and a talent for defending customers with money while blaming employees with none. "Claire," he snapped under his breath, grabbing her elbow. "What did I tell you about bothering guests?" "I wasn't bothering. You want to lose this job?" His grip tightened. "Apologize and move." Ethan watched the hand on her arm before he looked at Ron's face. "Take your hand off her," he said. Ron gave a nervous laugh, the kind men use when they don't realize they are already standing too close to the edge. The music from the dining room kept playing, soft piano over crystal and low laughter, but at table 14 the air had already changed. Ron's fingers slipped off Claire's arm as if the skin there had turned to fire. Across the white linen, the silver candlelight caught the heavy ring on Ethan Moretti's hand, a dark gold band set with an old crest worn smooth by time, the kind of piece that did not come from a jewelry case, but from a bloodline. Claire's eyes had fixed on it the moment he reached for his glass. She looked frightened now, not because of the guest, but because she had spoken one sentence no one in a room like this was supposed to say. Ron swallowed. "Mr. Moretti, I'm sorry, sir. She's new. She doesn't know how to leave. Just one word. Cold. Final." Ron backed away at once, pale under the amber lights, and the 2 nearby servers pretended not to stare while staring harder than anyone. The manager's authority had vanished in a breath. That alone would have been enough to make the room uneasy. But Ethan was no longer looking at Ron. His full attention had settled on Claire with a stillness that felt more dangerous than anger. The tray in her hand trembled once before she lowered it to the service stand beside the table. Up close, she looked younger than she had from across the room. Maybe 23, 24 at most. Dark skin, tired eyes, neat uniform pressed with the care of someone who could not afford replacements. There was no calculation in her face, no flirtation, no trick, only confusion, and the fading shock of realizing she had somehow stopped a powerful man in the middle of dinner with a sentence about a ring. Around them, forks slowed. Conversations bent, then thinned. Welf always recognized the sound of power shifting. Ethan leaned back slightly, but his hand did not move from the table. "What did you say?" Claire glanced at the ring again, then up at him. Her voice came out quieter this time. "I said my mother has a ring like yours, sir. Not similar. Like yours." The difference struck him first. A muscle ticked once in Ethan's jaw. For years, men had copied the Moretti crest on cheap gold, trying to borrow fear they had not earned. But this ring was old family metal. Handmade. Private. The design had never been sold. The crest itself, two crossed keys beneath a crown of thorns, was known only inside certain circles, and even there, spoken of carefully. There should not have been another one in the hands of a waitress's mother. He studied her face the way men like him studied threats. Brow line, eyes, mouth, bone structure. Not because he wanted to, but because something older than reason had already begun turning inside him. Where did she get it? Claire hesitated. The question was simple. The danger behind it was not. "She's always had it," she said. "At least as long as I can remember." "From who?" "I don't know." This time she did not look away. That was the first thing he noticed. Most people dropped their gaze when he sharpened his voice. Claire stood there scared, yes, but steady, as if protecting something mattered more to her than pleasing him. A server at the next station nearly dropped a wine key. No one moved to interrupt. Ethan spoke again, lower now. "Describe it." Claire frowned, thinking. "Gold. Thick band. Same shape on top." She pointed, not touching, only indicating the crest on his hand. "Mine, my mother's, is more scratched. The sides are worn down. Inside, there are letters." He went still. "What letters?" Her throat moved. "I only saw them once when I was little. An E and an M. Or maybe an E and a W. I'm not sure." She took it away after that. The room did not hear the meaning of that. Ethan did. Inside his chest, a locked door shifted on rusted hinges. His father had commissioned 2 rings 30 years ago. One for himself. A glass slipped somewhere behind the bar and shattered against tile, but the sharp sound did not break the silence at table 14. Candlelight trembled over white linen, over half-finished bourbon, over the gold band on Ethan Vale's hand as his thumb moved across its edge with sudden, unconscious care. The ring had always been heavy. Tonight it felt heavier, as if the dead had reached up through metal and laid a hand around his wrist. Across from him, Claire still held the empty water pitcher against her apron, her knuckles pale, her breathing too careful. Ron looked from one face to the other and tried to recover the easy cruelty that had carried him through most of his life. It would not come back. "Ethan," he said with a laugh that landed flat, "you're not seriously taking this. Leave. Just one word. Quiet. Final." Ron stood so fast his chair legs scraped hard across the floor. No one at the table argued. Men who had spent years measuring danger in boardrooms and backrooms understood the change in Ethan's voice. Jackets were pulled on. Watches caught the light. Within seconds, the expensive noise around that table dissolved into awkward apologies and lowered eyes. One of the men muttered something to Claire that might have been sorry. She barely heard it. The room breathed again only after they were gone. Ethan rose, not with anger now, but with the rigid control of a man trying to hold shut something old and violent inside himself. "Manager," he said without raising his voice. A short, balding man in a black tie hurried over at once. "Yes, Mr. Vale. I need 10 minutes with your waitress." Ethan's gaze never left Claire. On the clock. No penalty. No questions. The manager swallowed. Of course. Claire should have said no. Every warning her mother had planted in her since childhood stirred at once. Powerful men ask politely when they know they do not need permission. Powerful men smile before they take. But this did not feel like pursuit. It felt like being pulled toward the center of a story her mother had spent 20 years refusing to tell. She set the pitcher down. The manager led them away from the dining room to a private wine alcove near the back hall, where dark bottles slept behind iron lattice, and the air smelled of oak and dust. A single amber wall sconce washed the narrow room in soft gold. Outside, dishes clattered, a server laughed too loudly, a printer spat out new orders. Inside, time thinned. Claire remained standing. Ethan did too. "When did your mother get the ring?" he asked. "I don't know." "What's her name?" Her chin lifted a fraction. "Why?" "Because 30 years ago, a woman had vanished from his father's life, carrying a promise no one in the family was supposed to mention again. Because at 14 Ethan had stood outside his father's study and heard his mother break a crystal decanter against the fireplace while she screamed another woman's name. Because a week later every photograph from a certain year disappeared from the house, and every servant learned the same lesson. Silence is how rich families bury blood. He did not give Claire any of that. "Not yet." "Because if what you said is true," he answered, "then your mother may have known my father." Claire's eyes sharpened, not with wonder, but with defense. "Known him how?" The question struck cleanly. Ethan looked past her for one beat, to the iron racks and shadowed glass, and the past opened with brutal precision. A summer estate in Savannah, heat pressing against the windows. His father younger, laughing in a way Ethan had almost forgotten. A woman in a blue dress, turning her face away from the camera, gold flashing on her hand. Then his mother's voice years later, low and venomous. She was paid to disappear. He came back to the room with his jaw set hard. "I don't know," he said, "but I know there were 2 rings. My father had them made. One stayed with him." Beyond the restaurant's smoked glass doors, midnight rain slicked the curb into black mirror. Inside, the last of the dinner crowd still floated in low voices and polished laughter, but the private tension at table 14 had become something colder, sharper, almost surgical. Claire stood with the empty tray against her apron, shoulders tight, while Ethan Vale remained seated for one beat too long, his hand still near the ring on his finger, as if touching it kept an old ghost from walking fully into the room. Then the chair legs scraped back. "Ron," he said, not looking away from Claire. "Close my table." It was not a request. Ron swallowed hard, muttered something that sounded like "yes, sir," and reached for the check presenter with hands that had lost all swagger. A minute earlier, he had still been a man trying to laugh off a waitress's strange question. Now he looked like someone who had just realized he had interrupted a funeral without knowing whose body was in the casket. Claire took a step back when Ethan rose, not out of fear exactly, but out of instinct. Powerful men moved one way in rooms like this. They filled them. They bent them. And this one had just gone very still, which felt more dangerous than rage. "Your shift ends at midnight?" he asked. The question landed softly, but there was steel under it. "In 20 minutes, Claire said. "Good. Don't leave." Her fingers tightened on the tray. "Sir, if this is about what I said, I didn't mean any disrespect." "It's not disrespect I'm worried about." The room went quiet inside her, though the piano still played beyond the wall. He turned then, finally breaking eye contact, and slipped a black phone from inside his jacket. Not the public one he used at tables. Another one. Smaller. Plain. The kind of object that looked harmless until a man like Ethan Vale used it. "Luca," he said when the line picked up. "I need the Savannah archive opened. Tonight." A pause. "No, not tomorrow. Tonight." His voice dropped lower, each word clipped clean. "Pull every photograph, ledger, travel file, and household payroll record from my father's estate between 1991 and 1994, especially staff transfers. I want every woman who vanished off those books." Claire's breath caught. He had not asked whether she was lying. He had chosen to verify. That changed everything. Rain tapped harder against the windows. Near the bar, a server froze with a stack of dessert plates, eyes darting away the moment Ethan looked up. He walked toward the far end of the dining room, where a frosted door led to the owner's office. And for 1 second it seemed the conversation was over. Then he stopped and looked back at Claire. "What's your mother's name?" She hesitated. The whole restaurant seemed to wait with her. "Marisol," she said. "Marisol Bennett." Something unreadable crossed his face. Not recognition. Not yet. But the name had weight now. It entered the machinery he had just set in motion. "Did she ever live in Georgia?" "I don't know," Claire said. "She doesn't talk about those years." "Does she still have the ring?" Claire nodded once. "Locked away." She only takes it out when she thinks no one is watching. That answer hit harder than he expected, not because it proved anything, but because it sounded like shame taught by fear, and Ethan knew too well what wealthy families buried when they wanted history cleaned. He opened the office door. "Wait for me." Then he disappeared inside. The next 15 minutes moved like a held breath. Claire finished side work she could barely see, wiping already clean silverware, stacking sugar caddies that did not need stacking, hearing Ron avoid her by choosing every other station in the room. Her mind kept circling one impossible thought. If this man truly knew something about the ring, then her mother had not just hidden a past. She had hidden a life. Rain tapped against the restaurant windows in a nervous, uneven rhythm, turning the parking lot outside into a sheet of broken black glass. The kitchen had gone half dark. Chairs were already upside down on most of the tables. In that thinning hour between business and silence, Claire finally untied her apron with stiff fingers and stepped into the alley behind the building. Phone pressed so hard to her ear it left a pale mark against her cheek. The call connected on the fourth ring. Her mother answered breathlessly, as if she had been pacing. "Claire." The sound of that one word stopped Claire cold. Lorna Hayes was never breathless, never careless. She was the kind of woman who folded grocery bags smooth enough to reuse and locked every door twice before bed. Fear did not belong in her voice. "I'm off work," Claire said, keeping her own tone level. "Mama, I need to ask you something, and I need you not to brush me off." A pause opened on the line. Long listening. Then, quietly, "What happened?" Claire looked through the narrow glass panel in the back door and saw the reflection of the dining room behind her. White tablecloths, amber light, the soft moving shadows of staff closing out checks. Somewhere inside, Ethan Vale was still there. Not eating now. Waiting. "A man came in tonight," Claire said. "He had a ring. Gold. Heavy band. Crest on the side. He said his father had two made." Nothing in the alley moved except the rain slipping down the dumpster lid and the steam rising from a vent in pale ribbons. But on the phone, everything changed. Lorna inhaled sharply. Not surprise. Recognition. "Claire," she said, and this time her voice dropped into something raw enough to scrape. "Listen to me carefully. If he asked you questions, you tell him nothing else." Claire's spine stiffened. "So you do know what I'm talking about. Go home." "No." The answer came out before fear could soften it. It hung there, small and defiant, between daughter and mother. Inside the apartment, 3 miles away, Lorna sat on the edge of a narrow couch with one hand over her mouth. The living room lamp cast a tired yellow glow over thrift store curtains and a coffee table scarred with old water rings. In the bedroom closet, beneath a winter coat she had not worn in years, an empty jewelry box still waited on the shelf like evidence that had never stopped breathing. For 24 years, she had protected her daughter with silence. Not because silence was noble, because silence was the only thing that had kept them alive. "You don't understand the kind of people attached to that ring," Lorna whispered. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Then make me understand." Another pause. This one fractured by the sound of a cabinet door opening on Lorna's end, then closing too fast. Claire knew that sound. Her mother only moved like that when panic had climbed high enough to break through discipline. "I should have told you before," Lorna said. "I kept thinking if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, the past would die where I left it. It didn't." No, a shaky breath. "No, it didn't." The alley suddenly felt too narrow, the brick walls too close. Claire leaned against the damp cinder block and lowered her voice. "Who is he to us?" Lorna did not answer the question Claire asked. She answered the one she feared. "If that man is asking about the second ring, then someone else may already know he found you." Claire blinked. "Found me? Come home right now." The words were no longer a request. They were a command born from terror. Back in the apartment, Lorna was already moving. She crossed to the closet, dragged down a dented lockbox from the top shelf, and knelt on the worn carpet with trembling hands. Inside lay a stack of old documents bound with a faded ribbon, a Polaroid curled at the corners, and a train ticket stub so old the ink had browned. From the hallway outside apartment 3B, the building's old pipes knocked behind the walls like a warning no one else could hear. The yellow ceiling bulb buzzed overhead. Rainwater dripped from umbrellas left by other tenants near the stairs, tapping the cracked linoleum in a slow, ugly rhythm. Inside, the lockbox lay open on the carpet, Its paper ghost spread around Lorna's knees while her breath came too fast, too shallow, as if the room itself had begun to close in on her. The first knock at the door was soft. The second was not. Lorna froze with the Polaroid in her hand. In the photo, a younger version of herself stood beside a man in a dark coat at a train platform, his face half turned away from the camera, one hand visible, the ring unmistakable even through the age-faded blur. Beside the picture sat a folded document with an old surname Claire had never heard her mother say out loud. Lorna shoved the photograph back into the lockbox just as the third knock landed hard enough to rattle the frame. "Open up." "Not police. Not a neighbor." The voice carried no uncertainty. Across town, under the restaurant's smoked glass awning, Vincent Moretti stood with one hand in his coat pocket, looking at the rain as if it had personally offended him. The search he had ordered less than an hour ago had moved faster than memory should have allowed. An old jeweler in Queens had confirmed the commission. 2 rings, custom engraving on the inner band. One made for Marco Moretti. The second made at Marco's insistence for the woman and the child. If anything happens. Vincent had not spoken for several seconds after hearing it. Now one of his men stepped close and lowered his voice. "We have a problem." Vincent turned. "Someone else pulled records tonight. Not us. Somebody asked about the rings before we did." The cold in Vincent's face changed shape. It was no longer surprise. It was calculation. Who? The answer came with a name Vincent had not heard in years, though he had buried bodies because of it. Sal DeLuca, Marco's former lieutenant. The man who had profited most from Marco's disappearance. The room behind Vincent seemed to lose all sound. At apartment 3B, Lorna did not open the door. She grabbed the ribbon-bound papers, the train stub, the ring, and shoved them into a canvas grocery bag hanging from a chair. Her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped the lockbox lid twice before leaving it where it fell. Then she crossed the apartment in 3 quick steps and yanked open the window above the fire escape. A voice behind the door sharpened. "We know you're in there." "Not we." Plural. Lorna looked once at the phone in her hand. At Claire's name, still glowing on the screen from the missed call, she had been too terrified to return. Then she killed the apartment lights. Down in the alley, tires hissed over wet pavement. Vincent's sedan had not yet fully stopped when he opened the door and stepped into the rain. One glance at the apartment building was enough. A rusted fire escape, 3rd floor corner window, one dim hall bulb, and at the entrance, a black SUV he did not recognize. He saw the man leaning near the front steps first, broad shoulders, cheap leather jacket, one hand under the hemline where a weapon usually hid. Not local muscle. DeLuca's kind. Hungry men wearing rented confidence. Vincent kept walking. The lookout straightened. Buildings closed. Vincent did not slow. "I said, move." Just one word. Quiet. Final. The man reached inside his jacket. That was all the permission the night needed. 2 of Vincent's men emerged from the rain-dark street as if the weather itself had shaped them, one pinning the lookout against the brick before he could draw, the other stripping the gun from his waistband in a single brutal motion. No shouting. No wild chaos. Just wet shoes scraping pavement, a muffled grunt, and the sound of authority taking the air back. Upstairs, another blow hit Lorna's door. The chain snapped. Wood splintered inward with a dry, vicious crack, and the apartment's stale air jumped as if fear itself had taken shape. The broken chain swung from the frame. A broad-shouldered man in a soaked windbreaker stepped through first, breath hot, eyes searching, one hand already lifting toward the dented lockbox on the carpet. Behind him came a second, thinner and meaner, his gaze cutting from the old papers to Lorna's face with the ugly certainty of someone who had been sent to erase more than steal. Lorna rose too fast from her knees and nearly stumbled. Her fingers closed around the curled Polaroid before either man could reach it, and she backed toward the kitchenette, chest heaving, the train stub and loose papers scattered at her feet like bones. Age had thinned her frame, but not her instinct. There are women who survive by noise. Lorna had survived by silence, by hiding, by swallowing truth until it turned to iron inside her. "Give me the box," the first man said. She did not. Another step, another narrowing of space, another second shaved off safety. Then the hallway answered with a force colder than panic. Heavy footfalls. A body striking plaster. A curse cut short. The first intruder half turned toward the door, just as Vincent entered behind his men, black coat damp with rain, expression carved from the same hard stillness that had frozen him at the restaurant. In the yellow apartment light, he looked less like a rescuer than a verdict finally arriving. The room went silent. One of Vincent's men shoved the thinner intruder to the floor. The other pinned the broad one against the wall, forearm crushing his throat. No speeches, no theatrics, just control. Just the old grammar of power spoken fluently by men who had lived too long around danger. Vincent's eyes did not go to the intruders first. They went to Lorna. For one suspended beat, neither moved. Rain ticked at the window. The radiator hissed. The Polaroid trembled in Lorna's hand. She knew him before he spoke. Not by age, because time had recut him into something harder. Not by status, because power changes posture, voice, and clothes. She knew him by the ring catching the weak apartment light, and by the scar near his jaw, faded now but still there. A thin pale line memory had kept sharper than sight. 30 years vanished with cruel efficiency. The room, the men, the broken door, all of it dropped behind the impact of recognition. "Don't let them touch that box," Lorna said, and her voice came out raw. Vincent took one step closer. "They won't." The thinner intruder spat blood onto the floor and gave a crooked laugh. Too late. He knows she kept it. Vincent turned his head just enough for the man to understand he had made a mistake. "Who sent you?" Vincent asked. The man pressed his lips shut. Vincent's stare moved back to Lorna, and what passed across his face then was not softness. It was worse. It was memory forced awake. Lorna looked at the ring on his hand, then at his face, as if choosing between two versions of the same wound. "I told her never to say a word about it," she whispered. "I told her if anyone ever asked." She was mistaken. Downstairs, in the street, in the restaurant, and every place that had shaped the night, Della had still believed she was chasing a mystery. In this cramped apartment, the mystery finally found its voice. Vincent spoke carefully, like a man stepping onto ice. "Della is your daughter." "Yes." The answer landed clean and irreversible. A muscle moved in his jaw, and the ring. Lorna closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them with the exhausted courage of someone who had run out of places to hide. "You gave it to me at Union Station the night your father's men came looking for us. You said if I kept it, I'd have proof one day." Her hand tightened around the Polaroid. "I did not know I was carrying more than proof." The apartment seemed to shrink around the truth. Rain hissed against the fire escape. In the hallway, heavy footsteps thudded past the broken door, then stopped with the patience of men who knew fear would do half their work for them. On the kitchen table, beneath the weak yellow light, the Polaroid trembled between Lorna's fingers while the old ring caught a sharp, cold glint. What had been a question only minutes ago had turned into evidence, and evidence was the one thing men in his world killed for. Silas did not move toward her at first. He stood in the splintered doorway with rain darkening the shoulders of his coat, his face gone still in that dangerous way men became still when emotion had to pass through discipline before it could reach the body. Across the room, Nia looked from her mother to him and understood only the shape of the silence, not yet the full weight of it. Her breath came shallow. The cheap apartment smelled of dust, old radiator heat, and fresh terror. Then Lorna did something neither of them expected. She placed the ring in Silas's open palm. "Take it." The words were quiet, but they changed the air. Until then, he had been the one pulling truth from shadows. Now she was the one deciding what truth would cost. The metal looked almost black against his skin, heavy with 30 years of absence. His thumb brushed the inside band, and there, nearly worn smooth by time, were the initials he had not seen since childhood, AM on one side, Yell on the other. His mother's initials. The room went silent. Nia stared at his hand, then at her mother's face. "Mom." Lorna swallowed once, hard. "Your grandfather had 2 rings commissioned," she said, looking at Silas and not looking away this time. "One for himself. One for the son he wanted to own like property. But your father gave his away before they could make him become what they were." A muscle tightened in Silas's jaw. He had come there expecting a scandal, maybe a betrayal, maybe a lie wrapped in old sentiment. What sat in his hand was worse for the family name and deeper for the blood beneath it. Not a rumor. Not a maybe. Proof. Outside, a man cursed in the hallway. Silas lifted his eyes toward the door. "How many?" "3 came up," Lorna said. "Maybe more downstairs." He nodded once, already calculating. This was no longer a private wound. It was a loyalty test, and loyalty in his world split men cleanly into the living and the dead. From the hall came another voice, lower, angry. Bring the girl. Nia went pale. Silas turned to her, and for the first time that night his voice lost all trace of distance. Get behind me. She obeyed instantly. His phone was already in his hand. One call. No hesitation. When the line clicked open, his tone dropped into pure command. 6 men. Now. 3rd floor. No police. He ended the call before the answer came. Lorna's eyes sharpened with a different fear. If they know who she is. They don't, he said. It was not comfort. It was strategy. The knob twisted from the outside. Silas stepped away from the table and drew his gun in one smooth motion. Not dramatic, not rushed, just practiced enough to be frightening. But the true shift in the room did not come from the weapon. It came from what he did next. Without taking his eyes off the door, he set the ring into Nia's shaking hand and folded her fingers over it. Keep that closed, he said. No matter what happens. Lorna stared at him as if the past had suddenly put on a face she recognized. The door pushed inward against the broken frame. One man entered first, broad-shouldered, water dripping from his shaved head, confidence leading him farther than caution should have. He saw Silas and froze half a second too late. Boss. Wrong move, Silas said. The man dropped his gaze at once. Not to the gun. The man in the doorway went pale so fast it seemed the color had been pulled out of him by hand. Rainwater ran from his coat to the splintered floorboards, but he did not move. Behind him, another pair of shoes stopped in the hall. No one spoke. In that cramped apartment, with the broken chain hanging and Lorna's fingers still wrapped around an old Polaroid, the balance of power shifted for the first time away from fear. Silas did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Get out of my sight, he said. The first man backed into the hallway at once, dragging the second with him. The door, half broken and crooked on its hinges, stayed open a few inches after they retreated, as if even Wood had learned better than to stand between that room and what had finally been uncovered. Then their footsteps faded down the stairs. The silence they left behind felt heavier than the threat had. Nia stood near the kitchen threshold, one hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with the kind of shock that changed a daughter before it changed her words. She had spent the night trying to understand why a stranger with a ring like her mother's had frozen at a waitress's sentence. Now the stranger was no stranger at all. He was the last living witness to the life her mother had buried. Lorna lowered herself into a chair as if her knees had stopped belonging to her. The years were written across her face in lines of labor, grief, and stubborn survival. But beneath them, in the tilt of her mouth and the set of her eyes, Silas could see the young woman from the photograph. Not memory, not resemblance. Her. He looked at the ring in his hand, then at the one she had kept all these years. My father had those made as a pair, he said, each word landing with the weight of something delayed for 3 decades. One to mark blood, one to protect it. His jaw tightened. He never gave the second one away unless the person mattered more than his empire. Lorna closed her eyes briefly, as if hearing a dead man's sentence echo through the room. He knew they would kill me if they found out, she said. Not because of me, because of what I was carrying. Nia turned slowly toward her. What I was carrying, she repeated, voice small. Lorna opened her hand. The Polaroid trembled between her fingers. In the dim yellow light, the old picture showed a younger Lorna standing beside a man in a dark overcoat at a train platform, his face partly turned, one hand on her shoulder. On the back, faded but still legible, was a date. The same year Silas's father had disappeared from public life for 3 weeks, no one had ever explained. Silas took one step closer. His voice dropped. My father sent you away to save you from his own men. Lorna nodded once, tears gathering without falling. He said his house had become a place where love was punished. He said if I stayed, the child would never live long enough to know her own name. Her eyes found Nia's. I ran because he begged me to. The room went still. Nia stared at her mother, then at Silas, then back at the ring. The truth arranged itself with brutal simplicity, the kind that needed no lawyer, no priest, no second telling. Silas's father had not hidden a mistress. He had hidden a daughter. Nia's breath left her in one broken sound. You're saying, she could not finish. Silas finished it for her, his eyes steady on hers. You are my father's child. A beat passed. Which makes you my sister. No one moved. Then Nia sat down hard on the edge of the couch, as if the air had vanished beneath her.